I'd like to welcome you all to FASDNow's 4th annual webinar, Transforming Lives, Preserving Resources, a Strategic Approach to FASD for California. My name is Annette Kunzman, and I'm president of FASD Network of Southern California, an FASD United affiliate and member of FASDNow. Most importantly, I'm mom to 2 young men on the FASD spectrum. On behalf of FASDNow, we're excited that you've joined us today to delve into complex problems of FASD. And we look forward to the open forum discussion at the end of the agenda, where we may come to some resolution on a path forward. I'm grateful to you, our presenters, and those behind the scenes that brought this webinar together. So what is the motivation behind the theme of our webinar? There has been more than 50 years of research on FASD, yet the leading developmental disability is mainly invisible in California. Over a dozen state agencies in service for disabilities are not addressing FASD. So what would it take to properly help the individuals living with FASD, their caregivers, and their professionals? The state is spending billions of dollars on special education, medical and mental health, homelessness, joblessness, and the judicial system, instead of focusing their resources upfront on prevention, diagnosis, and support. Doesn't it make sense to reallocate resources to the front end of the pipeline to transform lives and prevent expensive negative outcomes? I think we can agree that it's past time to address FASD at the state level in California. So next, looking at the agenda for the few hours that we have together, we asked a few questions when you registered for the webinar, and we will review the responses. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Juan Carlos Arguello, will present on the work he's doing to address FASD within the Office of Youth and Community Rehabilitation at the Department of Health and Human Services. After that, a resident FASD guru, Dr. Kenneth Lyons Jones of UC San Diego, will bring us up to date on FASD. Then we'll run a short trailer of the 16-minute documentary, The FASD Project, which you can view on YouTube at another time. Next, you'll hear from individuals with lived experience, Patty Casper and Justin Shepard, moderated by education advocate Michelle McGowan. The lived experience panel has become a highlight of our webinars. After that, Tom Donaldson, President and CEO of FASD United, the national voice on FASD, will update us on the progress of the Federal FASD Respect Act and other states' activities addressing FASD. Then Sid Gardner, President of Children and Family Futures, will bring us back to California to note the progress and challenges of addressing FASD within our systems of care. He will discuss the question of priorities, and then we will have an open forum to highlight comments, suggestions, and questions, and maybe come to some resolutions and conclusions to carry us forward. So, who's here with us today? When you look at this pie chart, you see that 83% of us come from California. Another almost 15% reside outside of California, even registering from Scotland. And then there's a few that live both within and outside of California. There is a nice diversity of organizations represented today. Several FASD organizations, mostly within the state and several without. There's county agencies, federal agencies, child welfare organizations, medical clinics, Indian tribal entities, CASA representatives, child welfare firms, individuals, early childhood intervention, adoption, probation. One starts to see how broad the impact of FASD is on all of our systems of care. The next slide indicates participants' roles. Again, there's a large range. Bigger representations include medical and hospital professionals, education and academia, local public agencies, policy or advocacy organizations, and clinical psychologists, including therapists. Next clusters include social workers, case managers, child welfare, including CASA, state government agencies, criminal and juvenile justice. And finally, there's a range of individuals representing the federal government, board members, educational consultant, child abuse, advocate, etc. We are so glad you are all here. Next, we broke it down by one's relationship to FASD. At least 2%, and I suspect there's more, of the attendees have an FASD. 36% are family members of a loved one with FASD, and over 60% don't fit this category. So the majority of you can learn from us that are caretakers and or may live with this condition. Finally, we asked why you elected to attend the webinar. Almost 60% stated that you work with or serve those with FASD. About 13% stated they are familiar with FASD but do not currently serve and are interested in building capacity to serve FASD. While yet another 13% stated that they do not know much about FASD and would like to know more. The remaining 15% had a variety of answers ranging from being a parent or family member, advocate, collaborator, nonprofit member, and so on. These answers and responses highlight the whole community that is working to address FASD, and we appreciate all of your work. It does take a village. Next, let's look at FASDNow and what it is about. We are a California alliance composed of nonprofit grassroots advocacy organizations, professionals, providers, lawyers, academics, researchers, and others focused on FASD who agree it is time that FASD is recognized throughout all our systems of care as California's leading developmental disability, and that those with this condition are identified and they, their caregivers, and their service providers obtain the appropriate training and services they deserve. Since we formed over 4 years ago, our membership has grown, and we have started to make progress on our objectives. The major accomplishment in 2022 was the sponsorship of California legislation that amended the Education Code to include FASD as a condition to be considered for eligibility for special education services under the category of other health impaired. That was a steep learning curve for us, but we had a great champion in Senator Anthony Portantino, and it passed through all committees in both houses to the governor. He signed SB 1016, and the bill became law on January 1st, 2023. We didn't stop there, as we want to ensure that the law is implemented appropriately by the schools. Our education committee has developed training modules and is working with the Department of Special Education and California school psychologists to roll the training out. Trainings are conducted upon request, including recently for a charter school, a community college, and a juvenile justice setting. So far, most requests for training come from parents through the IEP process. We expect this will drive further training throughout the school system. So that's one example of working with state agencies. Recognizing that agencies cannot work in silos, that the education department cannot be successful on its own addressing FASD, we continue to develop relationships at the state and county agencies to educate them about FASD and to gain support for assessments, workforce training, and appropriate services. We hope to become strong partners with the state agencies that are and should be addressing FASD. Given that there is so much to address within California on FASD, we think that the most effective way to approach the complex issue is the establishment of a state interagency council that is charged with developing a strategy and plan to address FASD. With that in mind, we worked with Senator Portantino's office and the California Legislative Council to draft a bill to establish an FASD coordinator at the state level charged with convening an interagency council to address FASD. We were unable to get the bill introduced this year, but we have met with several offices with hopes of bipartisan sponsorship for 2024. And besides state level work, we continue to educate our elected officials our federal elected officials about the need for the FASD Respect Act by helping constituents meet with their representatives to tell their stories and advocate for the bill's passage. And finally, many of our members work with task force in their own counties to address FASD, notably Santa Clara and San Luis Obispo counties, and others work to implement plans of safe care in LA and Orange counties and elsewhere, and all work at their local levels and with organizations to further FASD awareness. So now, I'd like to turn it over to our keynote speaker, Dr. Juan Carlos Arguello. Is Dr. Arguello here?
Thank you, Annette.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Juan Carlos Arguello, and I'm the Chief Health Policy Officer for the Office of Youth and Community Restoration, or OYCR. Could we have the first slide, please? Today, I will present a very exciting initiative, the OYCR FASD project. I would like to start with my favorite professional quote by a family therapist, Ashley Warner. Next slide, please. Beneath every behavior is a feeling, and beneath a feeling is a need. And when we meet the need rather than focusing on the behavior, we begin to deal with the causes of the symptom. Next. The vision of OYCR is to have a healthy California that enables all youth to be responsible, thriving, and engaged members of their community. We promote trauma-responsive, culturally informed services for youth involved in the juvenile justice system that support the youth's successful transition into adulthood. Next. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder are complex disabilities caused by alcohol consumption during pregnancy, producing brain damage, with potential impact to key areas of brain function, including memory, processing information, executive function, adaptive skills, social communication, ability to transition, among others. Youth who have these disorders develop significant interpersonal, behavioral, and academic challenges that are sometimes unable to respond to the usual or common interventions used to help youth with complex needs. Very often, these youth strengths are not sufficient to face the constant challenge of daily life. Identification of these disorders, understanding the impact on the youth, and learning the approaches that help these youth will assist them in living their best life. Next. Let's start with some background.
Okay.
Next slide.
Who's that?
Our OYCR director, Judge Catherine Lucera, over the years that she served in Santa Clara Juvenile Court, saw firsthand the effects of FASD on children and families, and how important it was to engage in educating, preventing, and providing much-needed services to those impacted by these disorders. Soon after I joined OYCR this past May, Judge Lucero asked me, what can we do to help youth involved in the juvenile justice system who have FASD? Next. I was put in contact with Dr. Kenneth Jones from the University of California, San Diego, and we began to collaborate. Next.
Move. Hey, move.
We learned from Dr. Jones' work that 24% of youth in San Diego juvenile court screen positive for FASD. And Greenmeyer and others published that in California, 17 to 35% of youth involved in juvenile justice have FASD. In addition, 35 to 50% of youth in California in the caseloads of child welfare workers have FASD. And that nationally, 86% of youth who are adopted and in foster care have FASD. The American Academy of Pediatrics has reported that most children with FASD are never diagnosed or are misdiagnosed, despite having severe disabilities in neurocognitive, adaptive, and behavioral areas of functioning. Dr. Jones and I decided to start at the most basic level, the diagnostic criteria. Next. Neurobehavioral disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure has four main areas. Criteria A is that there must be more than minimal exposure to alcohol during gestation. Criteria B, impairments in neurocognitive function. Next. Criteria C, impairments in self-regulation. And criteria D, impairments in neurocognitive adaptive functioning. Next. Dr. Jones and I wanted to bring FASD screening where these youths are. For youth involved in the justice system who are in secure settings, this means juvenile homes, camps, and ranches. And for youth in foster care, residential facilities. In these probation and foster care settings, the adults that can identify the challenges faced by youth are correctional officers, child welfare workers and staff, teachers, mental health providers, child and family team members, mentors, parents, and guardians. Kids with FASD are complex. For this reason, we wanted to start our algorithm by adults serving youth asking themselves if this youth is considered a complex or difficult case. Could they have FASD? Next. We then develop a list of items that may indicate that FASD is likely if the youth was exposed to alcohol in utero. Two or more of these items may indicate FASD. High family history of substance use, including combining meth and alcohol, inappropriate sexual behavior, multiple mental health diagnoses. And these are the kids that when you open their medical record, they have multiple diagnoses. Attention deficit disorder, plus oppositional defier, plus mood disorders, plus bipolar, plus reactive, plus. Also, if the youth has a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder and they have not responded well to medication. Very important if they have failed cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, behavioral modification, and reward punishment models. Also, if they have failed despite increases on intervention, and this could be repeated failures. And then we also added adaptive function or daily living skills lower than expected based on their cognitive abilities. Next. Historically, FASD has been diagnosed by physicians and neuropsychologists. So we ask ourselves, do we really need physicians and neuropsychologists to diagnose? A comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation is expensive, and there are a limited number of neuropsychologists available. Also, the number of pediatricians that are comfortable diagnosing these disorders is limited. And forget about waiting to see a child and adolescent psychiatrist. We consulted with neuropsychologists and other experts in the field of FASD and concluded that FASD can be diagnosed by social workers and psychologists. These professionals are more readily available in probation and foster care. The scope of practice of social workers and psychologists allows for conducting a comprehensive clinical evaluation to interpret the results of the child behavioral checklist assessment and to perform and interpret the Vineland-3 adaptive behavioral scale. These three assessments are crucial in the process of diagnosing FASD. Next. Before. a complex case. Could this youth have FASD? And we also provided the gold box with all the items. And if the answer is yes, then the youth is referred to a social worker or psychologist where they, with help of other staff, can find evidence of in utero alcohol exposure. If the answer is yes, they can perform a clinical evaluation, the Vineland, and the child behavioral checklist. And the result of those assessments then can help diagnose the youth with fetal alcohol syndrome spectrum disorder. If the youth have noticeable clinical features, then they are referred to a medical provider for a history and physical evaluation so that fetal alcohol syndrome is ruled in or out. Next. In terms of next steps, OYCR and UCSD are developing a two-arm protocol for diagnosing FASD in probation and foster care setting using this new algorithm. One arm of this pilot calls to partner with a county probation department to expand Dr. Jones' previous findings. And a second arm calls for partnering with a county child welfare department to assess youth in a residential setting. In terms of prevention, we have begun discussions with Dr. Bruce Perry, who developed the neurosequential model of therapeutics. The neurosequential model argues that therapeutic interventions, which are informed by principles of neurodevelopment, are more likely to effectively target brain dysfunction from maltreatment trauma or from other adverse childhood experiences. Next. I would like to end with this phrase, and Annette used it earlier today. It takes a village to raise a child. This phrase is from an African proverb and conveys the message that it takes many people, the village, to provide a safe, healthy environment where children are given the security they need to develop, flourish, and to be able to realize their hopes and dreams. Next. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arguello. We cannot thank you enough for your work. This is so important, and we're thrilled that your agency is taking this on. I think it's gonna be a huge game changer for all the youth that end up in the juvenile justice system, and our sincere gratitude. Next, we'd like to hear from Dr. Kenneth Lyons Jones, who has been doing research on FASD for 50 years. And as Dr. Arguello noted, he's been working with Dr. Arguello to develop the algorithm. Dr. Jones, please bring us up to date about FASD.
Thanks, Annette, very much. Christina, if I can have the first slide, please. Okay, as the title of my talk indicated, I'm going to talk today about what we know about the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And I can tell you without question that we know a lot about it. We certainly do not know enough about it, but we do know quite a bit. So first of all, we know that FASD is more common than autism spectrum disorder. In fact, it's twice as common, at least, as autism spectrum disorder. We know that there's not a safe level of drinking during pregnancy. We know that alcohol is the drug of abuse that has the greatest impact on fetal development. We know that the prevalence of FASD is between 1.1 and 5% of school-age children across the United States. And we know that in San Diego County, California, the prevalence of FASD in first and second grade students in the San Diego Unified School System is 2.3%, and that's 1 out of every 44 students. Now, unfortunately, when I talk to people about what we know about the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, I often get a response that is very surprising to me. And that response is shown here in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide. A person's eyes roll back when they hear me talk about what we know about this disorder within a minute or two, and it's clear that they're bored by what I am saying, and they don't want to hear anything more about it. However, when I tell them that 24% of the adolescents incarcerated at the San Diego Juvenile Hall have been prenatally exposed to alcohol, I will tell you I get their immediate attention. And this has led me to believe that the criminal justice system is the most effective way to make people aware of this disorder. Christina, can I have the next slide, please? All right, over the last 20 years, we have evaluated over 100 adolescents in numerous juvenile halls throughout Southern California. In these cases, public defenders have asked us to see their clients because they have gotten a history of prenatal alcohol exposure and wanted to use it as a mitigating factor in their criminal trials. Their crimes were varied and encompassed crimes against persons, including shoplifting, burglary, and assault, crimes against property, possession or selling of drugs, sexual assault, and even in some cases, murder. We've now examined 33 men and 2 women on death row in at least 11 states, including California, Washington, Arizona, Oklahoma, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, Colorado, Florida, Arkansas, and Louisiana. In all cases, their lawyer wanted to use prenatal exposure to alcohol as a mitigating factor to change their sentence from the death penalty to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In all cases, their trial lawyer had provided them inadequate counsel by not bringing up the fact that they were prenatally exposed to alcohol. Next slide, Christina, please. So traditionally, the court system throughout this country, and California is no exception, has treated individuals with an FASD without kindness or compassion. But I want you to know that this may well change. A court has been established in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, to handle sentencing for adolescents and adults with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. The court helps offenders with FASD navigate the court system and connect them with specialized help as part of their sentences. In many cases, the offender is brought before a judge who considers how their diagnosis of FASD contributed or didn't contribute to their crime. In some cases, it's very clear. For example, in the case of an offender who fails to make their scheduled meeting with their probation officer because they cannot tell time. A key to the court's success is connecting offenders with the FASD justice program. The program connects the offender with caseworkers who help them with probation and the justice system. And I would mention that there is a lawyer, now a professor of law at the New York Law School, Michael Perlin, who has just submitted a paper about just this fact, setting up in this country, in the United States, similar fetal alcohol syndrome, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder courts. And I think that this is a fantastic thing, a fantastic new thing that is going to benefit a lot of adolescents and adults with this disorder. The next slide, please, Christine. Now what I want to do is talk about a prevalence study of FASD in San Diego Imperial Valley Regional Center. I think most of you know what the regional center programs are. Basically, for those of you who are from other states, this is sort of mission control for individuals with developmental disability. Among 216 eligible caregiver child dyads, 44 completed assessments for FASD by one of us. However, 15 out of the 44, which is 34%, of those who caregivers completed the assessment were not diagnosed as having FASD. So there is a minimum FASD prevalence rate of 16.9%, and a maximum FASD prevalence rate of 34%. So I think the actual number is somewhere between 6.9% and 34%. None of those were classified as FASD. None of those classified as FASD were receiving services for FASD, and none had been previously diagnosed as having an FASD. Autism spectrum disorder was the most common diagnosis for which the 15 children with FASD were classified. So despite being the most common cause of intellectual disability, FASD is not one of the specific eligible categories recognized by Regional Center, and this is one of the great challenges that we hope to deal with over the next year. Next slide, please, Christina. All right, now I want to talk about prevention of this disorder, and I will tell you that there's been very little done as far as prevention of the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is concerned. And specifically, I want to talk about promoting early pregnancy awareness as a method to decrease prevalence of FASD. So the average gestational age in this country at the time of pregnancy awareness is 5.5 weeks. Irrespective of whether pregnancy was intended or not, the vast majority of women stopped or decreased drinking alcohol after pregnancy awareness. And this is fantastic news. And it's really critical that women stop drinking when they find out that they're pregnant. And this suggests that promoting early pregnancy awareness could be more effective than promoting abstinence from alcohol among all women who could conceive. The latter won't work, and the former results in reduction in alcohol consumption and therefore decrease in prevalence of FASD. Next slide, please, Christina. All right, the ways to decrease time between conception and pregnancy awareness have been, well, they haven't really been developed, but there's a lot of talk about how to do this. And the first thing I want to talk about as to how to deal with this is the RO ring. And you see here an RO ring on the index finger of this woman on the right side of the screen. The RO ring is used to monitor your sleep, your heart rate, your energy level, and now the time of conception. So preliminary data have now been recorded from 30 pregnancies of continuous body temperatures taken once every minute, 24 hours a day, recorded from an Aura ring for passive pregnancy detection. Aura's temperature data is able to spot a unique pattern of temperature increase about the time of conception that is consistent with known rises in progesterone in early pregnancy and is greater than that seen during the luteal phase of their menstrual cycle. Next slide, Christina. All 30 pregnancies showed a clear temperature increase following self-reported conception that was identifiably higher than the increase that typically occurred during the luteal phase of their menstrual cycle. Aura's nighttime temperature data were able to help identify pregnancies early, only 5.5 days after conception. This was, on average, 9 days before these individuals received a positive at-home pregnancy test. And this was 5 weeks earlier than most women recognized they are pregnant. So the next slide, please, Christina. And the second way to decrease this time between conception and pregnancy awareness is a bit of science fiction, but I want to talk here very briefly about the zinc spark. It turns out that billions of zinc atoms are released at the exact moment when a human egg is penetrated by a human sperm cell, resulting in a zinc spark. This event was first noted in the mouse and now has been documented to occur in humans and most likely occurs in all vertebrates. And on the right side here, you see the egg with the sperm fighting his way into the egg. And on the right side, you see that sperm has broken through, and you see the zinc spark, which is so dramatic. A fluorescent sensor was used to track zinc in live cells, 8,000 zinc compartments were noted within the egg, each one containing about 1 million zinc atoms. At the moment of conception, the zinc molecules are released, surrounding the area around the egg with zinc. A sperm enzyme was used to activate the egg, since fertilization of the egg with actual sperm for research purposes is illegal under U.S. federal law. The next slide, Christina. Christina. Okay, thanks. So this is a sort of conclusion of this part of my talk, which is the last part of my talk. Approaches to decreasing the time between conception and pregnancy recognition represent an innovative way to decrease the prevalence of FASD in the first trimester. Unfortunately, data from Northern California now indicates that during the third trimester, prenatal alcohol exposure returns to early first trimester levels, particularly in women of higher economic status. Thanks very much.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Jones. That was so enlightening. The research in the juvenile justice and regional centers is so helpful, and that's the kind of data that's so critical to help us obtain policy change. So research into action, right? And I love this suggestion of early detection. Prevention of FASD is probably never going to be 100%. Because lots of pregnancies are unplanned. But I love so that's going to happen. But the earlier it's detected, the better we can start to intervene. Next, we're going to just run this short trailer on the FASD project. It's a 16-minute documentary, but we have limited time, so we're just going to give you the teaser, and I will put the link to the YouTube documentary for your later viewing.
So many people that are impacted by FASD, and really nobody knows about it.
The economic impact is profound. The cost to the family, the cost to our communities, the cost in our schools.
When you stigmatize and you take people and you separate them into groups, or you're losing resources, you're losing information, you're losing knowledge.
I think the key to raising awareness among the public is a social movement.
Okay, so I think that's so true. We need a social movement on this complex issue of FASD. And now I am delighted to introduce the panel of individuals with lived experience, moderated by Michelle McGowan, an education advocate and a mother to children adopted through the foster care system. Take it away, Michelle.
Good morning. Thank you guys so very much. I had the pleasure of doing this last year, and I'm so excited to be back again this year. As a mother who adopted children through foster care and was a foster parent, this is very clearly close to my heart. And so I am thrilled to talk about this. When I'm advocating, I often see in the classroom the struggles that Dr. Arguello and Dr. Jones both talked about and see that. And so I'm honored to be speaking with Patty today. She is our first guest, and Justin as well, about their lived experiences. And so I had an opportunity to talk to both of you. And I think, Patty, if you would like to go first and tell us a bit about yourself and your experiences.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. I have over 30 years of experience in serving a variety of needs in addictions and mental health, and the last 24 years in child welfare here in California. And I've always been one to just dive into trainings so that I can more effectively serve those whom I'm working with, especially youth and their foster families or adoptive parents. And in this process, of course, I did all the trauma-informed stuff, but it didn't seem to be enough. So I dove into the world of FASD and realized that these were the kids that were falling through all the cracks and, had terrible outcomes upon aging out of the system. And these are also the reason why kids bounce from home to home to home, because foster parents and adoptive parents are not being adequately trained for working with youth with these challenges. And in the process of becoming certified in the neurobehavioral model, I realized, oh gosh, I do that. I do that. I struggle with that too. And I ended up having a conversation with my mom. And I said, did you drink while you carried me? And she's like, oh, yeah, every day. Because it was the early 60s. Nobody knew any better at that point. One of my two brothers recognizes that he too has been impacted. But really, even though I've been working for a quarter century with youth, I really thought about, given the low diagnostic rate, all the millions of adults here in California who are, going through life without understanding that their struggles had a biological, a neurological basis, and had internalized all the shame.
That's what I wanted to talk, when we were talking about your
Yeah.
story, that's what I found, and talking with Justin last night, is this, we need to humanize this, right? We need to take the clinical away from it, and that it is this group of people, and understand what the impact is. And now that we have adults that can voice that, because children are going through this and they cannot say what is going on, right?
Right.
They've only ever
Right.
been that way, so they don't recognize
Right.
their differences, and they don't know how to voice them. So I think it would be
Right.
profound for everyone listening to understand what it was to live like that as a child.
Yeah, as kids, well, three basic human needs, right? To know that we matter to somebody, to feel heard, and to be able to understand ourselves and the world around us. And when people don't see that we have cognitive challenges that make it very difficult to do what most people assume to be very simple, easy, basic things in life, we don't feel seen or heard or valued. And instead, the experience of the youth is that they're blamed, shamed, and punished. And we take that upon ourselves. We internalize that. We ask ourselves, what is wrong with us that we can't do whatever it is? And, it's just recognizing that I was on the spectrum changed nothing and everything all at the same time, because it changes the perspective, and I really want everyone to think about, it's 1 in 20. So it's one child in every classroom. It's one child in every Girl Scout troop or Boy Scout troop. It's one person in every office. It's several people on the block on which you live, and we're everywhere and not understood.
Can I ask you one other question? That when we hear the word cognitive impact, you and Justin both are very successful. So I want to understand that sometimes people think of cognitive impact only as intelligence,
Yes.
right? And it isn't always that someone with FASD has a lower IQ or is impacted intellectually, but of other cognitive areas. Can you kind of explain how that?
So one example would be the ability to take on and or complete complicated processes, right? If there's something that needs to be done, but it has many, many pieces and parts, sometimes just the volume of steps is overwhelming and keeps people from even starting. Another example from my life, the yuppie way of running away from home is to run to college dorms. And I started college at 16 because I had the intellectual capacity, but I didn't have the stick-to-itness. And so as a result, I kept changing my major, and with that, my school. And as a result, by the time I started my junior year, I had over 100 credits. it's very well-rounded education, but what good did it do me?
Right.
I'd like to think that nothing is wasted, but it leads to a loss of productivity, right?
And a sense of failure, I would assume.
It robs us of the potential to do everything. So the earlier the diagnosis is, the more supports can be put in place. And the more likelihood there is of someone picking up that ball that they are uniquely skilled and interested and running with it and finding that success.
That's awesome. And I think this is a good time to bring in Justin and talk about your unique perspective. Also, being a male, I think it is also different than in the interaction with a female. And then we'll come back and talk about both of you and the success that you've had. But Justin, you and I spoke at length last night, and thank you for taking the time to go through all that with me. But I think some of the things that you spoke to me about that I think would be great for everyone to hear is your interaction with the justice system and how you viewed yourself as a youth.
Yeah, and thanks for having me, everybody. It's great to be here and talk about my experiences as well. And something just leading into that Patty just touched on is just, I wanted to just say, whether it's AR&D or, severely alcohol impacted, the commonalities and the struggles are the same for all of us on the spectrum. Now, the severity of those struggles differ from person to person, and success isn't measured. I appreciate, being considered successful, but I struggle and I don't consider myself successful. I struggle in my own ways, in my own rights. It's very relative to everybody, and it's the same struggle that everybody who has an FASD struggles, in their own right. So for me, yes, starting with, my interaction with the law, that was one of the things that I struggled with in my earlier years. And we talked about this last night as well, and I think this is an important thing to touch on, which is, when I made the FASD project and I toured around and I interviewed people living with it and caretakers and all of that, I came to realize that there's a theme that needs to be changed, and that's the punitive measures that are taken towards individuals living with this disability. So, and it starts very young. It starts at home, it continues on in school, and then obviously by the time that you're an adult and if you're out on your own, it continues on when you interact with, police or come across a situation. And that's the lack of awareness to understand the situation that you're in. For me, that got me in more trouble. Not being able to understand my rights or be able to I felt threatened, which got me in more trouble because I raised my defenses. And then the next thing you know, I'm in trouble, or being arrested. I've been arrested several times. I've been to jail, more than, I think, 5 times total in my life, and again, I kind of joke about this, but it's another reason that I had the epiphany that I might have things. I thought everybody went to jail a few times, it's like a rite of passage in American society. So, as it goes, I wasn't really a big troublemaker in school. I was afraid of getting in trouble. I just tried to make myself invisible. And then at times when I was getting called out or whatever, I have been in trouble at school, but I wasn't the kid that was always in trouble, right? So, and this is why it's so important in the public education system and at home for people living with an FASD is to understand the plight of that person and understand and have empathy for what they're going through and understand that they don't understand. And that becomes a frustrating cycle that just goes over and over and over again. And that cycle just gets bigger. And that's why the incarceration numbers in the U.S. are so high. And the numbers that we spend on the tax dollars incarcerating individuals with disability is through the roof. It's in the billions of dollars. And so
can we go back for just a second and talk about that impact? I think that that's really important because it compounds, right? You start out in kindergarten and you're falling slowly and slowly behind, but now you're starting to get in trouble, or you're being told you are just not trying hard enough, right? And what does that do to you, as a child? And I think that that's really important. And we start looking at the human toll, not just what the disability does, but the interaction with the community around them, I think is important. And if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to again reference another anecdote. When I interviewed Dan Kabowski and his son, they were having trouble over and over and over in school. They had moved several times, had to go to different schools and such. And he finally sat down with them and just wanted to understand why this behavior was occurring, right? And these behaviors are intrinsic to the environment around you, right? Any person, even someone with an FASD, with any disability, is trying to navigate the world from their own perspective, right? And when the world outside doesn't understand your perspective, it makes it extremely difficult, and it creates behaviors, right? Such as the story that Dan was telling me about his son, which is why do you keep getting in trouble? Why do you keep making these scenes in this class and disturbing and getting kicked out of schools and all this stuff? And he said, Dad, I don't want to be the dumb kid. So before the teacher has a chance to call on me and me look like an idiot because I don't know the answer in math class, I make a scene and I get myself exited, right? So, I mean, that's just kind of one example, but I mean, that's kind of how an insight into the brain of someone with an FASD is like. That's why I made myself this, because I don't want to be called on either. Even if I did know the answer or not, I don't want to be called on for that, right? So, I mean, there's only certain avenues you can take when the outside world doesn't understand you. And going back to the dehumanization thing, I mean, it's something we do collectively as a society for persons with disabilities. It's easier for us to process. And it's something that subconscious does. It's not malicious or a choice that we do. We all have implicit biases. We all have things that we do to try and work through things. But as a society, persons with disability are constantly doing. And again, the only path forward to helping individuals living with disability, FASD in general, is to understand them and understand FASD as a whole. And then we can accommodate those things without taking punitive measures. Oh, you're bad, here's punishment. That's not ever going to work.
Right. I think too that I want to talk about too is that both of you, and I hear this a lot as an advocate, and I heard both of you say this. And what I try to do as an advocate is change that word behavior, because it implies choice to a manifestation of the disability. And when we start looking at FASD as this is the manifestation of this disability, there's not a blood test, there's not there's these criteria, just like autism and other things, right? And we can look at that and say, okay, this is the manifestation of their disability. It is not a behavior. There is an implied, society thinks a behavior is implied that you can control it. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that. Go ahead, Patty.
I want to address that for a moment because most of the time, at least in the field as a former therapist, social worker, when people use the word behavior, what's not spoken is the word bad. Mm-hmm. Bad behavior. Nobody takes their kids to therapy for good behavior, right? But behavior in and of itself simply means the way something operates. And there's no morality to it. There's no good or bad, no right or wrong. It's just the way it works. When we change the structure of the brain, we automatically change the way that person's going to be functioning in a variety of situations. And so we do take on that shame, right? Because our behaviors are thought to be intentional, to your point. But we, just as those with many other disabilities, we work very hard at masking so that we are not picked on or called upon by the teacher and outed by the teacher for whatever, but also from our peers. Because we all know how cruel kids can be to one another, for those deemed other, or different. So I don't know where else I was going with that thought.
I kind of lost track of time, so if somebody could let us know how much time we have, I'm sorry. But I did want to, kind of talk about when you came to realize this, because there was not a particular moment in your life that changed it. It kind of was an evolution of understanding, right, for both of you. So can you kind of explain how that happened, and then how did that change your view of yourself and help others to understand you?
For me, it got rid of a lot of the shame. The transitional years from adolescence to young adulthood are difficult for everybody, right? It's just a problematic period. But especially for those of us who have maybe some dysmaturity or, who are really struggling with the social emotional development. Like I said, I ran away to college at 16. Academically, I was ready. Socially, no way. So for me, when I figured it out, like I said, it was because I was being trained in the neurobehavioral model, which is really shifting that paradigm from behavior as intentional to behavior as a byproduct of brain function, right? It took away all the shame. It made me look at that transitional period of my young adulthood, and it's less cringeworthy now because I understand, I didn't make good choices because I couldn't. And it has given me self-compassion and made it easier to wrap my heart around all those phases of life and get rid of the shame, just eject it right on out of there. So, and Justin?
I agree exactly with that. It impacted me the exact same way. We all are our own worst critics, and we're all the hardest on ourselves, obviously. And I have the same thing. Like, I feel ashamed that I got in trouble, that I made the decisions that I made, and when I carried it with me for a long time, getting the diagnosis allowed me to free myself of that and understand myself better. That, hey, there was never exactly like I said, I didn't have a choice. I did, but I didn't, if that makes sense. So to understand that about yourself is a very powerful thing. And, going back to, the behavior thing and all of that and the choices that we make and such, I think it's important to understand that with disability, with FASD, we all make our own choices, right? But FASD is more impacted by external circumstances, right? There's a constant feedback loop of what we're receiving and how we're processing that, and then what we're putting back out. And so this is important, I feel like, for police why it's important for the police, to be trained and understand persons with disability. Maybe not, send police to every situation. Like in Colorado, as I mentioned last night, they've been sending nurses and psychiatrists and stuff. And this is a better way forward for persons with disabilities. This is a accommodation, right, to that feedback loop, so that can help us be our best. And no matter what disability it is, no matter what, where you're at on the spectrum within that disability, it's important to understand that feedback loop starts with empathy and understanding that, we may seem like we're difficult or we're this or that, but we have to live with this every day. And, we don't get a break from it.
That's one thing you said. Yes, that's one thing you said to me, and I know we need to wrap up, and I'm doing that next. Is that you said to me last night, and I really wanted to carry this home, is that, and I see that too when I go to schools and I see teachers and I see caregivers and stuff, how overwhelmed they think. And you said something to me that just made me almost go to tears. And so if you could just close with that, if you remember what I'm trying to lead to without taking away with what you said. That caregivers might seem that this is really hard, but
you have to empathize with the person you're caregiving for, because someone living with an FASD wakes up every day in the same headspace with the same brain function. We get no break from it. And as frustrating as it can be, where the real change will come in for teachers, police, caregivers, anybody dealing or living around or living with FASD is empathy and understanding that person and understanding that they don't get a break from it and that they're not necessarily choosing to be difficult, or it's coming back to that feedback. We're being told, oh, and we're seeing we're causing difficulties. People with FASD, if anything, we'll give you the shirt off of our back standing in the rain. We are people pleasers. We want to do right by people. We don't want to frustrate people. And I think I can universally say that for everyone that I've met living with FASD. And so it all starts with understanding and having that perspective shift of that they're not choosing to be difficult. They're not choosing to make this decision, or, again, this comes back to that behavior conversation, right? It's all external, and the way forward is there's different tactics that can be used for FASD in general to help us live our best lives and help people that are helping us live their best lives as well. So again, empathy is the path forward.
Thank you guys so much for sharing with us today. And I know that we could talk about this forever, but there's other people waiting. But I did just want to tie it up with one thing. And I think I got this from both of you. And as a mom, my sons have autism, not FASD, but I understand what it is. But I think what I got from both of you is, while you might be overwhelmed as the caregiver, you're not the one with the disability. We are living with it. And we don't get to walk away. You can walk away for a minute and we can't. And I think when we, as everybody who's interacting with somebody who has FASD, understands that, it breeds compassion. And so thank you guys so very much for being honest and open and willing to share your stories with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for sharing, for making yourselves vulnerable in front of a bunch of strangers. We could make this session, much longer. We value your insights. It's helpful for all of us. So thank you so much. What I'd like to do now is get the national perspective from Tom Donaldson, who's president and CEO of FASD United, the national voice on FASD. Tom will be bringing us up to date on the Federal FASD Respect Act, as well as some perspective on other activities from other states. Go ahead, Tom.
Annette, thank you. Thank you so much. Good to see you and so many others. Michelle, Patty, Justin, I mean, that is so important, so fabulous, so inspiring. Your words, as always. I mean, you guys are the leaders, and everybody's influential in all that we're trying to do, of course. Then the giants in the field like Dr. Jones and people like Dr. Arguello. So thank you for always speaking out and your great work. And Annette, thank you for inviting FASD United. Now, of course, you would expect to see Jen Wisdahl here, and the reason why I'm filling in for her is because Jen and Susan Carlson, the co-directors of the FASD United Policy Center, they're right here in D.C. where I am, but they're up on Capitol Hill right now, as they've been there this week, doing everything they can to get the FASD Respect Act passed, to get in a position to pass in whatever may occur here in the House and Senate between now and the end of the year. So we are, you have been vital, instrumental in getting us to where we are, and they are trying to get us over the line here with your help. There'll be more guidance for you all as advocates and leaders to weigh in. I want to just very briefly talk about the federal response to FASD, a little bit, very little about the history of FASD federal legislation, of course, the Policy Center, and then the Respect Act. So many of you are familiar with that and have played a role. So let's see if someone can advance the slides and go forward. I just have a handful of slides, and we'll try to be brief. So let's move on to the next one. There's our introduction, and as I mentioned, and Annette did as well, just so what I want to touch on. very briefly. So with the next slide, I'm just going to say a few words about since Ken's couple of papers in the Lancet 50 years ago got us thinking about this issue, and the federal folks involved. In the 70s, believe it or not, the first advisory advised women to drink no more than 2 alcoholic drinks per day during pregnancy. So it was in 1981 when there was an FDA, Federal Drug Administration bulletin, and followed up by a Surgeon General's alert that for the first time recommended total abstinence. And then we had the Alcohol Labeling Act in 1988, and that's why we have, as you probably all know, of course, a label on all containers of alcohol sold in the U.S. But it wasn't until the 105th Congress that actual specific FASD legislation passed. Although, let me back up. There was a brief language in a 1993 bill that was offered by, of course, Senator Ted Kennedy and Senator Orrin Hatch. And in that legislation, there was language and an appropriation to the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism to establish the Interagency Coordinating Committee on FASD, ICC FASD, and to fund a study at the Institute of Medicine, which resulted in the publication in 1996 of, I think, a seminal publication that helped to influence what you see here in the 105th Congress, the first bill that passed. So there were, like there are now, there were House and Senate bills. Unlike now, they went nowhere. And so fortunately, they were attached in the 105th to this Health Education Partnerships Act. So the bills in total were added to this other legislation that was passing. And so they were passed and enacted. And the following Congress, a second bill was passed, where once again non-specific FASD legislation, but FASD provisions were added to another, as they say, moving vehicle, must-pass legislation, and that established or helped to establish and authorized what some of you may remember as the Center of Excellence, the now FASD, we would say Center of Excellence, and then in 2000. Senator Tom Daschle, who was his party's leader, offered an amendment to get the thing funded. So it got the legislation from the 105th and 106th funded. So it established the National Center on Birth Defects and Developmental Disabilities at CDC, and within that was a line for FASD, and at SAMHSA it established the line of funding in there, and a national task force which expired in 2007. So next slide, we can see just a quick snapshot of today, federal agencies, and these figures, as you see in the columns to the right, in just this current fiscal year, and or actually the fiscal year that ended September 30th. We're now in federal fiscal year 2024, and some earlier years. You can see the funding available specifically for FASD. The research described there at NIAAA has led the way with most funding. Public health at CDC, you can see, has had the barest of incremental increases over the years when it comes to its funding. And you also see there at SAMHSA how, what I mentioned earlier, the Center of Excellence and its funding was zeroed out beginning in actually 2016, and there is no money for FASD at SAMHSA. And $1 million, a lonely $1 million, and you can really look at it as that's the only money, federal dollars, that is being spent now, which is in support of individuals who live with FASD. Now, all of it is, of course, but the research and the public health, which informs the important work that it provides real world services and resources. Yes, it's vital, but we don't have any dollars right now specifically for those services and resources, and that's what the FASD Respect Act does. Next slide. So I just, as I said earlier, the Policy and Training Center, in addition to Jen and Susan, who you all know, I hope you do know Chris Melfi. Also, he's involved on that team and vital in coordinating your efforts. And you can see here what we're trying to do. Obviously, achieve public policy outcomes, and also work with everyone throughout the field to make sure that we have consistent messages that we're all pushing in the same direction and moving from trying to meet with policymakers to say, can I tell you about this issue? To pounding our fists on the table saying, you've got to address this, and making them feel the heat of the passion of our field. So next slide. Okay, so very briefly, the Respect Act, I think most of you are familiar that in this Congress, the current Congress, the 118th, their companion Senate bills, Senate 1800 and House Bill 3946, the FASD Respect Act, a trimmed down version from the previous Congress. The original sponsors, Lisa Murkowski in the Senate, Don Bacon in the House. There are many other sponsors you see now in the House and Senate who are involved. So let's talk for a second about what it does in the next slide. The Respect Act, as I said a moment ago, there are no provisions for NIH, for instance, or research. Those folks know how to address this issue. They know the research institutes and universities that are working on this issue and making incredible progress. And they don't need any guidance from Congress to continue their important work. CDC and its public health efforts, much the same. But what we do need to do is we need to make sure that there's funding, you see there, for state and tribal systems, for services throughout the lifespan. And also a center of excellence. So we want to renew the center of excellence by disseminating best practices, working to increase diagnostic capacity, providing training and technical support, all on behalf of individuals and their loved ones, caregivers who live with FASD. Okay, so where are we and what do we have to do to get this passed? Next slide, please. Okay, so the legislation has not passed through the traditional process. You write a bill, you get co-sponsors, you have it introduced, it's assigned to committee, the committee takes it up, votes it out of committee, it goes to the full chamber on both sides, and then it comes together in conference. So we're not able to, we don't have the momentum, we don't have the allies yet to be able to do that. So what we have to do is be creative and use the rules and procedures of each chamber to advance it. So when the House, what we're working with the key members is through the House suspension calendar is to get the legislation that doesn't have to be reported out of committee. So this can be any bill that's been introduced can be advanced in this manner. It does need, as you see, a supermajority required for final passage. So that is the strategy they're working on with the key folks in the House. And in the Senate, the Support Act, we have had success in attaching the Respect Act to the Support Act. The Support Act was the really one piece of legislation that the Committee of Jurisdiction, where our bill is, has shown an interest and talked about passing, being able to get both parties to agree to pass this bill. So the bill is attached to the Support Act. It is unclear whether the Support Act will pass at this stage. And many of you may remember you were intimately involved in this last year in an effort to hotline the bill through the Senate. And we're working on that already again this year, where one member can bring this up and try to get it passed through unanimous consent, as you see there how that process works. And many of you remember that unfortunately last year one senator did object and blocked the bill. I wouldn't look at it just that that necessarily means that all 99 others supported it. Could mean that Senator Lee from Utah in that instance was the one on behalf of many other conservative senators who was on the lookout for legislation that might cost any money at all and block it. So we talked to Senator Lee's office and many others to help them understand the importance of this bill and the incredibly modest investment to get it passed. So these are the efforts that are ongoing now. Okay, next slide. I think I just had a couple more slides. Okay, so here is what we all can do to help ensure enactment of the FASD Respect Act in 2023, this year. Even though we're in the first year of the Congress, we want to get it passed this year. So many of you are long since are involved deeply in all these activities. But the first thing I would say is get in touch with Jen and or Chris, really on a daily basis, especially with Jen and Susan in town and meeting yesterday, today, and tomorrow. There are new opportunities. There are guidance coming from the committee staff and others as to who we need to talk to. So make sure that you're connected in with Jen and Chris. Now, of course, they are coming back at everyone with updates, with important information. But for instance, if you have a meeting coming up, a virtual meeting with a policymaker, a member or staff, check with Jen. Be proactive and check with them. I hope you, as I mentioned, they are updating on a regular basis, and you can sign up, so you don't have to come back to the website. You can just get those updates. And I think some of you attend every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, policy drop-in. Any questions you have, any information that you want to share with the team, that would be very key to participate there, and or sit in on the monthly policy forum, which is the last Wednesday of each month. You can get the information, the links, or how to sign up, register, etc., from the FASD United site. And of course, it stands to reason. It's very critical. We all got to continue to cultivate a relationship with our congressional delegation, and that means, do we know someone who knows the member themselves, and we can actually get to have a conversation with them, get an audience with them? Have we met their local district staff member, or have we connected with their staff here in Washington, D.C.? So it's not just one person. You really have to try and do what you can to build relationships at all levels with all folks. And then I think you already are involved with FASD organizations and advocate on a national level. But the important part here is to recruit new advocates. We need to continually find, additional folks who can help out, because the bigger voice we have, the more influence we have. As I said with Patty and Justin telling your story, thank you for doing that. We all have a story there. We all have a story about why we're involved in this issue. Make sure to emphasize, for many years, people talked about, well, here's what we don't know. Here's what we don't have. And the fact is, we know about this issue. We know how to address it. And we know how to support people and overcome secondary disabilities, all disabilities. And we need to emphasize that. We know how to do it. We need the investment. And it needs to be sort of compatible with the significance of this issue. So keep telling your story and keep being involved. And you never know. Sometimes if you engage with someone, when the legislation passed, quick story, Senator Arlen Specter was a very influential chair of the Appropriations Committee when that appropriation came through. He had been a Democrat. He was a Republican at the time. He later became a Democrat again. But we had him the day before. He was going to go, Tom Daschle was going to go to the floor of the Senate and ask for the appropriation. And so we've been working with Specter's office. We knew nothing about the issue. And we got him to come to one of our events the night before. He came in and he said, I'm here to tell you that I support fetal tissue research. Well, he got one of the words right. He couldn't even remember why he was there, what the issue was. Well, in 12 hours later, he got it right, and we got the money passed. And that vote, there was one no vote, and it was a senator from Colorado who, the only time I know of, that vote was used against him in a series of commercials by his opponent in the next election. So, we weren't able to get everything we wanted at that point, and we're not quite there yet either, but we're making a lot of progress. And I've been doing this for a long time, and it's extraordinary at where we are here. And sometimes people will ask, well, what comes first, the federal legislation or local and state legislation? I mean, does one push the other? Well, it works both ways. And I can tell you that the work that you have done and what you've accomplished in California has been instrumental on the federal level. Not just because you have so many members and influential members there, but because you have meaningful legislation that includes FASD and eligibility criteria. And other states are now working on that and have been, to whether it is mitigation in sentencing, eligibility benefits, state definitions of developmental disabilities, and funding for public health and services. So thank you for your leadership and all you're doing and how you're influencing other states and the federal level. Lastly, I think I have one more slide. It's a little off topic, but I want to remind everyone that, first I had just a couple of shots from the Impact Week in September. Annette was here, others from California. Many of you know Christy Petrenko on the left, who helped to host a congressional briefing. And then you see a couple of members, including Amy Cope, which are in the sort of lower right, who were out at an event we did. And you know, the top center. This is a meeting with Congressman Pete Sessions, and in that meeting, he agreed to co-sponsor the bill. So keep at it. Thank you for all you're doing. Last slide is just a reminder about when I hope we will all see one another in Seattle in April at the renewed international conference. So, Annette, thanks very much. Thanks everyone for your great work.
Tom, thank you so much. It's just great to get the federal perspective and overview and the history. I mean, you've been at this for so long. I apologize for your blacked out headers. I'm not sure why that happened. It looked fine at my end when I sent them over, but you rolled with it, and I'm very grateful. You're just a font of information about the history of this legislation, and I think this is, this current RESPECT Act should pass. Unfortunately, this is a difficult Congress, but we're working on getting our representatives in California to co-sponsor. Last year, we got at least half, or 24. We got to work. We got to get them to sign on again. So we'll keep pushing at our end. So next, I want to change this over to Sid Gardner, who's president of Children and Family Futures, which is based in Orange County. He does a lot of federal work on substance use and prevention and child welfare. Sid's going to bring us back to California and talk about the progress on FASD and the challenges that we face here in California. Go ahead, Sid.
Thanks very much, Annette. Good morning. I'm going to move through these. Let's go to the next slide fairly quickly, and the next one, so that we can leave some time for your questions and comments at the end. I think this slide has probably already been answered very well by Dr. Jones, Dr. Arguello, and others, including our friends with lived experience. The why is powerful in what we've already been talking about. I want to highlight the third bullet, however. We talk about substance use, prenatal substance exposure, and sometimes we separate out alcohol without recognizing how frequently use of alcohol is combined with illicit drugs. Let's go to the next slide. This is federal data, and you don't need to be able to read the fine print. The first bar is alcohol, prenatal exposure, then tobacco, then illicit drugs, then prescription opioids. The alcohol predominancy is what we're talking about, but if we were accurate, we would show those bars sliding into each other, because 40 to 50% of all persons who use illegal drugs also use alcohol. So knowing about an opioid exposure, a methamphetamine prenatal exposure, doesn't automatically rule out alcohol. In some cases, you should assume that alcohol was co-occurring at the same time. Next slide. Last year, we did a review of California state agencies that tried to map out the landscape of what agencies are now doing and what they could be doing. We were helped tremendously by looking at the other states around the country that were in the lead, particularly Alaska, Minnesota, Michigan, Colorado, and others. And we looked in California agencies for some kind of process that was interagency, that recognized that no one agency can solve this problem. And we found that there was no such thing as an interagency review of progress or problems. The relevant agencies have never been convened to talk about FASD. The current data collection efforts among agencies don't address the under-identification that we've been talking about. The good news is, as Annette and others have mentioned, the enactment of special education legislation that challenges school districts and the regional SELPAs to identify for the first time fetal alcohol spectrum disorder as a part of other health impairments. Tracking that in your county and in the nearly 1,000 school districts in California is a critical measure of progress. Next slide. We also had an opportunity to take a look at a county and found that in the county that we were looking at, the agencies currently had very small, or in some cases non-existent, numbers identifying children, infants and children with FASD, despite the fact that the Plans of Safe Care legislation requiring reporting or notification of prenatal exposure to child welfare agencies for the purpose of getting parent into treatment and child into developmental assessment. Wasn't happening. Prenatal screening using validated screening tools is infrequent. You can get Medi-Cal reimbursement for an entire 9 months of prenatal care without ever using validated screening that asks about substance use. And in trying to recognize how important it is to work not just with the child, but with the parent, to give that parent a chance to get into treatment. The real block there is the gap in family-centered treatment, because the current norm is to separate mother and baby when substance exposure is found. Place baby in foster care, send mom off to treatment if she's willing to go, and that gap of family-centered treatment, which is less than 5 to 10% of all treatment in California, is a big problem. And current developmental screening, as Ken and others have mentioned, in regional centers, in the child welfare system where developmental screening is required for all 0 to 3-year-olds, does not screen for or report FASD. Next slide. With the help of the states that are further ahead, we developed an answer to the question, so what should we be doing? What should the responses be? These 7 roles seem to be what states were doing. Not all states were doing all of these. Not all of these should be done at the same time necessarily. But if you're asking what is a comprehensive response to FASD, to identify it and then to intervene with the services that parents and children require, this was what we came up with in answering that question about the key roles. There has to be an interagency coordination function. We have to do a better job with coming up with prevalence data than we're doing now in California. We have to strengthen the training and the identification of screening and assessment, use of screening and assessment, with only 2, the earlier slide said 3, but that's a charitable definition, with only 2 diagnostic centers, both in Southern California, we're way short of that capacity. Prevention, the public awareness, the message on the side of the bottle when you walk into a bar isn't frankly working, because we've got state surveys, despite the lack of good data, showing us that as many as 8% statewide number of pregnant persons are still using alcohol in the 3rd trimester. Training, the curricula in university and state university graduate and professional education does not emphasize FASD. Treatment and focused services, we know what works in the terms of intervention. We're not doing it, it's not funded. I'm going to talk in a little bit about what the state is doing to its credit to expand what they call behavioral health interventions, mental health and substance use treatment interventions, but we're not getting those to children diagnosed with FASD. And finally, the private sector has a lot to do with this. Private providers, private OBGYNs, private hospitals, and the way the managed care system pays for prenatal care that doesn't include validated screening tools for substance exposure. Next slide. So with all these options for the 7 different roles that we talked about, it's important to be strategic and not, as I said before, try to do everything at once. The biggest challenges seem to be, as I've said, establishing an interagency process, a council with staffing and an annual report card on the indicators that we can use to measure where we're making progress and where we've still got problems. We also need to invest in better data collection and better assessment. We need to use prenatal screening with validated screening tools that do exist and implement the plans of safe care as a way of knowing at birth, ideally with prenatal substance screening, knowing before a baby is born that baby and mother both need treatment for prenatal exposure to alcohol. The implementation of SB 1016, the special education legislation, gives us an important opportunity with existing education code changes to see which school districts are going to step forward and do a good job of getting their school special ed staff, school psychologists, and working with others that can help them with the diagnosis across all the school districts in the state. We need, as I've just said, family-centered treatment that allows parents to keep their children while in treatment. To say to a mother during prenatal screening, tell me whether or not you use substances, when she may well know that the most likely response of most systems in most counties is to remove her baby, tells us how much we need family-centered treatment that allows parents to keep their children if mom and the other relevant members of the family enter treatment. We need expansion of diagnostic centers beyond the 3 that are now existing, 2 in being and 1 that's moving in the right direction. We need to improve, as Ken and others have talked about, the way the regional centers are screening out children with FASD or misdiagnosing them. One study done of a child welfare population found that over 80% of the children in the child welfare system were misdiagnosed, in which FASD was present and not diagnosed. And finally, we need to improve hospitals and prenatal service providers so that they can develop their own screening process and referrals to expanded family-centered treatment. These are the challenges that we're going to have to deal with in the months and years ahead. We're going to try to embody at least the first 2 of these and others in legislation and monitor the 3rd bullet, the implementation of the 4th bullet, the implementation of SB 1016 in the special education. We've developed, as you heard, some training tools with a terrific team of education-minded folks who really understand how to help the school systems move in this direction. These are the challenges that we need to monitor annually. This is the 4th time FASDNow, 4th year in a row, has held a webinar like this. We'll have a 5th and a 6th and a 7th. And we'd like to be able to report on progress against these challenges. But without naming the barriers and identifying the challenges, we may run the risk of congratulating ourselves on the progress that we've made without recognizing how many challenges were made. Next slide. To move from a list of things we want into the policy arena, as you heard from Tom and others, requires changes in policy and practice, and that requires new or redirected funding. Now, the good news in California, the place where the state, though behind in its response to FASD, deserves some credit, is major multi-billion-dollar, multi-year investments in changing Medi-Cal, in investing in substance abuse and mental health treatment, in doing school-based mental health and social services, and family-focused community-based services as well. But each of these policy initiatives should earmark funding for a proportionate response to the human and the cost effects of prenatal exposure causing FASD. Each of those initiatives have to be tracked as to whether or not they're taking FASD seriously. Thus far, in most cases, FASD is not an explicit target of these major steps toward new investments in what children, youth, and adults need to respond to FASD. And the cost savings, a number of people have referred to that. The best study that's been done estimates using 2016 numbers, the annual costs from birth on due to FASD at $23,000 a year. Now, some of the people in our group are dealing with adults in their 30s and beyond who are dealing with this. Multiply those years by 23,000 or its current equivalent, and we are spending, as Justin mentioned, billions of dollars. Nothing is more expensive than the status quo. We got to make these investments and prove the payoff from cost savings, from allocating and earmarking these dollars for these efforts. Next slide. These are the sources that I think can be helpful. The first one, the two journal issues just issued in the last month by the Child Welfare League include 18 articles on prenatal exposure with a major emphasis on FASD. The article that we did on California state agency responses is included as one of those 18. But all 18 articles in the two journal issues that have just come out give a better summation in one place, to the credit of the Child Welfare League, of the issues around prenatal substance exposure in general and FASD exposure specifically. FASD United, you heard from Tom how important they are. The FASD Collaborative Special Interest Group is a separate organization that has separate groups for different facets of the FASD problem. There's some learning modules on our site, and Casey Family Programs has some information on how to use plans of safe care to identify as early as possible children who are affected by prenatal substance exposure. So the resources are there, not just our own, but these national sources. We're rich in the background material that we need, but we need, as Tom and others have said, to apply it, make sure our legislators understand it, to make sure they hear from people in their districts, people with lived experience, and those of you who are professionals in the system. Every county in California needs to build on what the state is doing. And in California, there is an interesting dynamic that I've noticed over decades of work here and elsewhere, of the state saying, well, we're waiting for the counties to take the lead, and the counties saying, we're waiting for the state to give us the leadership. That finger pointing isn't going to get it done. The state agencies, and there are 18 of them, we've developed an agenda for 18 different parts of the state government that can and should be responding to FASD. Those resources are there. But counties can do things that the state hasn't yet told them to do. Counties can take the lead. Counties can run the kinds of pilot projects that Dr. Arguello talked about. They can look at their early care population. They can look at who got enrolled in early Head Start. They can look at the ways in which the child welfare system is not automatically enrolling families where substance exposure has been reported, but getting them involved in community-based agencies and peer recovery support and the other kinds of resources that some of your counties have. So counties can do things without being told or even advised by the state in a system where we've got some of the strongest counties in the country, some great leadership. Some of you on this call, leaders in county government, can take the lead, working with state agencies where they're stepping up to their roles and taking the lead on your own, where that's going to be possible and necessary. I hope this has been helpful. We've got some time now for questions and comments, and we welcome them.
Yes, now this is the time for some open discussion, and we'll take the opportunity to answer any questions that you have. Do we want to start with some of the questions from the chat after, and we can address those first, but then I really do want to ask you, Sid, if you could kind of pose some questions and maybe we can elicit some responses from some of our attendees today.
Well, I think one of the challenges, as I've just said, is for the county and the states and school districts to move toward a kind of collaboration that happens in some other areas, but isn't happening yet with respect to FASD. There's a need for, there are some all county letters. Those of you in the county government are very familiar with all county letters that come out from various state agencies, and they are guidance. They are sometimes directive. They are sometimes merely advisory. But taking those and asking which of those could we do soonest? Which of those should be the priorities here? Developing your own agenda. Again, going back to the slide with the 7 roles that we think make up a comprehensive response. Which of those are you best able to go on? Some of the counties involved late in the 2000s did with First 5 and other funding surveys of epidemiological surveys of prenatal exposure and use of different substances. 2008 data may be as good as what you've got, but how could you do that? How could you ask your hospitals, how many reports did you do this year? For which substances? How many were FASD? And perinatal service providers, home visitors, other agencies that are working with pregnant persons could be asked, how often were you able to identify a need for treatment? If what we're doing works, the number of pregnant persons entering treatment in your county should be going up. That's an easy thing to ask your county health agency. How many pregnant persons were enrolled? Nationally, out of all, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I want to say 7 million people who entered treatment at some point during the last year, fewer than 2% are pregnant. Well, that may reflect a priority, but when you know that when you're working with a pregnant person, you have the opportunity to affect the lives of at least 2 people, and sometimes a whole family, and the family after that. To say really what we do with our treatment funding, only 2% of that should be for pregnant persons and indirectly for their children to be. So you can ask those questions in your county with people that you know, people that you have social relationships with. In smaller counties, it's easier because a lot of people are on first name basis. And so you're not threatening somebody when you say, do you ever turn up FASD in your caseload? How often do you screen for that? How could you do that? And in a non-finger pointing way, ask those questions. We, in our technical assistance work, we have a stock phrase, which is ask hard questions gently and persistently. That's what we're suggesting you do.
Dr. Gardner, can we have some Q&A questions. Someone, Lisa Scheuer, would ask if you could talk more about the efforts to engage regional centers.
Ken and others of the parents who've dealt with that set of agencies have deeper experience than I do. But the Little Hoover Commission last year, maybe it was earlier this year, did a very detailed report on the regional centers and their inadequate funding and staffing. And again, pointing fingers at an agency and saying they're not doing their job, you probably ought to ask a little bit more about how they're staffed and how they're funded. But regional centers clearly have screened out considerably more FASD cases than they're screening in. They're going to start getting referrals. They're already getting referrals by federal law of all 0 to 3-year-olds who are supposed to have developmental assessments if they're insubstantiated child welfare cases. Asking them in one county, a large one, during our analysis, we asked the regional center how many cases they had identified over the past few years, as non-threatening a question as we could ask. And the answer came back in the last 3 or 4 years, we had 1.
Thank you. We have another point by Steve Crandall. Thank you, Steve. But it's going to be difficult to get changes in the criminal justice system until we can get an early diagnosis. Otherwise, kids will be treated as someone with conduct disorder or medicated and treated under the wrong but more typical diagnosis.
We use a framework of 5 levels of opportunities to deal with a child who's likely to be prenatally substance exposed during pregnancy, at the time of birth, in the first year, in the first preschool, 3 years, 5 years, and in the school system. Ideally, early intervention, all the literature, all the neuroscience, and you heard it today, says as early as possible is as good as we can get. But to continue looking for, asking about, watching for symptoms, learning if you can about, in the case of foster and adopted parents, birth parents' history. There are some birth parents who approached appropriately. Some of the clinicians have told us, well, acknowledge, I didn't know. I need help. I'm worried about my child. Asking those questions as early as possible. Steve's right. If you wait until a child is moved from 3rd grade into special ed, or is acting out in junior high and gets booted out of school altogether, we're going to miss many opportunities. It's also important to note, as national research has told us, painfully, that 3 times as many children are suspended and expelled from preschool as from the K-12 system, because the rules in the K-12 system about how you can suspend and expel are a little tighter than they are in preschool. Well, having a 3-year-old booted out because she's disruptive is a pretty good signal something's going on. And if we wait until she's in junior high, it's going to be a much more severe offense, and the juvenile justice system and others are likely to get involved. So early, your prenatal and perinatal service providers are crucial. Home visitors are crucial. Peers who are working as recovery mentors are crucial. They are people who speak the language often of those who are involved. But remember, we touched on this earlier, and I want to hit it again. When we look at the WHO question, who drinks during pregnancy? The numbers go up as income goes up. The numbers go up as education goes up. The numbers go up 4 to 5 times as many people with private insurance drink during pregnancy than those on Medi-Cal. And the numbers go up as we get into the whiter population. But who we're screening when we screen is exactly the opposite of that frequency of who's doing the drinking. So we need to know who we're talking about.
Thank you. Dr. Gardner, from our very own Rachel Singh. Her question is, are there established avenues or mechanisms for counties to share learnings and practices and consult with each other on an issue like FASD?
Well, there are county organizations, statewide county organizations, the child welfare directors, one that we've worked with a lot over the years. The Southbrook directors meet periodically, and we've talked with them. Some of our members have talked with them about these issues. There are statewide organizations of nearly every county department, including in the juvenile justice system, probation system, and law enforcement. And the opportunity to present to those statewide organizations or their regional counterparts is a chance to get a lot of people who are in the same line of business and talk with them on their wavelength about these issues.
I believe Patty wanted to chime in. Patty Casper.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that we have another opportunity of capturing more people, particularly more adults whose FASD may be unrecognized. You know, it's no secret that drinking and substance use tend to be generational in families. so are the physical effects of that. So if we're recognizing that perhaps, the children who are currently in the system are struggling because of prenatal exposure, we need to ask ourselves, could their parents also be? It's no secret that there are a great many social workers who get very frustrated at the parents' inability to complete what is perceived as a simple plan. But if they have, challenges from their own prenatal brain injuries, just being able to recognize that, reframe their struggles, support them in a different way is going to lead to better outcomes for the entire family.
Absolutely true. And a reminder of why, when we list the 18 or more state agencies that need to be much more engaged, the state university system is one of them. The UC and the CSU systems. We've talked to people in social work, medical schools, schools of psychology at the graduate level, and others. And they got little or no exposure to these issues. So recognizing a client who's having trouble for these reasons, if the client rolled in a wheelchair, you'd have a pretty good clue that they needed some accommodations. But if nobody ever talked to you about the kinds of symptoms that we're talking about, adaptive functioning, executive functioning, self-regulation, you tend to, as people have said throughout the presentation, you tend to blame them. You believe that they won't do what you want them to do, rather than assuming that it may be because they can't. And that can't and won't dichotomy is something a lot of people in this field use as a touch point.
Are there any other questions to our earlier presenters? Questions for Dr. Jones or Dr. Arguello or even Tom Donaldson or Patricia or Justin?
Barbara Hansen?
Yes, I was the whole problem of screening and finding of any kind of child find. I'm thinking of our two vital systems in California. One of them is the First Five system, and the other is, of course, early intervention. And the Department of Developmental Services. Both of those very large entities have money, and they affect a lot of thinking. And I just asked Patricia, you responded to my question. Do you believe, I know that early intervention, even though they've had recent attention to looking for what they call FAS and not FASD, which shows us that there's a limited understanding of the disorder. Do you think that there are ways that that First Five could embrace looking for FASD, informing about FASD? I know that being part of First Five in Santa Clara County, that the systems that were there were not appropriate to really suss out FASD, nor does early intervention, those systems, the way that things are set up now, are not really sussing out FASD also. So just wondering if you, Patricia, with your mighty hand as an executive director, would go back to First Five and ask what more can be done and how and be more accurate and pointed in finding these kiddos. Because you're there, and you have the money, and you have the power. And this, I'm talking about to Patricia Laura.
Okay.
Or at First Five, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm Patricia Loera, Executive Director of First Five Glenn County. There's 58 counties in California. There's an agency and an executive director in each county. Hi, Wendy. The beauty of First Five is, I'll give you the good news first, is that every county can customize to their community assessments. One thing that we have done in a we're one of the 21 smallest counties population. We have 29,000 with a very high poverty index and a very high migrant. And I'm not only speaking of culture and ethnicity, but also of the fire victims, the flood victims, and a very high COVID rate. So the beauty of that, the reason I give you that information is that we get to customize to what our assessments needs are. And we have a very high referral list of children that get reported from the schools, but because we're such a small county with 9 school districts, we get those referrals. We have a very warm handoff and referral service. So what we've done in our county is we have developed and kept healthy and tried to sustain those relationships with public health, mental health, the whole CWS program, the libraries, the schools, and so on. What the sad part of that is, we basically worked ourselves out of jobs with First 5 because we are primarily the smoker cessation and healthy body or in support of diabetes in young children and the lead poisoning and things that we've done. I've been with the agency for 16 years, and because of the decline in tobacco use products, our revenues have gone down severely. We've dropped about a third over the years, and just recently with the vape program, where we no longer get the percentage of Prop $10 from that vape tax that was voted on in June, there is no more revenues coming in. So basically what First 5 has done as a whole is really focused on that home visiting to where we can really embark with other agencies, make a power-strong entrance into our communities, and be able to run those assessments, bring up all of these different, I'm just amazed at this presentation today. I want to thank everyone that put this together. It's beautiful, as you saw in my comments. We really need this out there, and I would love to see this happen again. I know some of you said you might be coming to the First 5 Summit in February, and in March there's another. That would be amazing because we hire and embark with the nursing staff that goes into the homes right out of the hospital. We develop those relationships. We assess for behavioral with the DECA, the ACEs, and the ages and stages. There's all kinds of evidence-based things that are coming up and being funded that we are pushing on. So we are part of the master plan for California's young learners 0 to 5 and pregnant women and families. So you will be seeing some bigger things happening. And we are working with legislation, and our governor, Gavin Newsom, and his wife, Jennifer, where a lot of us are personal friends with them now because they are so engaged in this. So I can see a lot of camaraderie building after this, and I did ask for a letter of support that I could push at our association meetings. So blessings to you, and thank you for the question.
Thank you so
I
much.
just wanted to say,
oh, sorry, Barbara. I just noticed that we are almost at time and we have a flood of questions. I'm wondering if I could just pick one more high importance question. This is from Rosie Freehart, Children's Law Center. The organization I work for represents all of the foster youth in the dependency system in LA, Sacramento, and Placer counties. Do the panelists have any tips for our attorneys on how to talk with minors who have FASD about their diagnosis and what it means?
I'm not sure how to answer that, but if they are identifying the youth they're working with as having an FASD or probable FASD, I would simply rejoice in that, simply because so few ever get their diagnosis. I would emphasize the positive aspects of neurodiversity, that we're not all trapped in a box, that it can, there can be a lot of benefits to being an outside the box kind of thinker, that we see things in different ways. Different is not worse. There's nothing pathological about experiencing the world differently, seeing it differently, understanding it differently. And for every challenge, there are also strengths. So I would definitely include those points in talking with youth within that system.
Can I just back on that first 1 second? As an education advocate, I think that it's really important for them to understand that while you might not fit in the box of education, right, and you might struggle there, like anyone who has a learning disability or challenges at school, adulthood is different, right? And so there is hope. And when I go and to meetings and I'm working with the school and I'm working with caregivers and I'm working with the students, is for them to understand that everyone has a challenge. Theirs is different, theirs is unseen and unknown, but that there's nothing wrong with them. They are who they are, and that they have challenges and they have things that they have to meet, but it's not wrong.
I would just make a comment here. This is Ken Jones. I have a therapist who works with me by the name of Andrea Torzone, who sees every patient that I see in my clinic. And she sees it from just the standpoint that the question was asked. She talks to the youth that we see in our clinic and explains the whole thing about the neurodevelopmental problems that that child is going through. And I would simply, I'm not sure exactly who asked the question, but I definitely would contact Andy Torzone, and I can give you her telephone number. It's 858-246-0047. And I think she is fantastic at doing just exactly what was suggested, or what was the concern that someone had.
Wonderful. You know, I could see that this conversation could go on and on and on, but we are at the, we've already gone over. We appreciate we appreciate the presenters. We appreciate all that have attended. We appreciate your engagement. And I'm encouraged by the turnout, the variety, the range, the diversity, all that you represent. I'm really encouraged and hopeful that we are really starting, hearing from Tom and the momentum that's going on for the FASD Respect Act, what we're doing here in the state and at the county levels and local levels. I'm very, very encouraged. I do want to plug FASDNow. If you're in California, join us. Please reach out to me or to any other members. www.fasdnow.org is our website. And we'd love to have you be involved in our advocacy work here in the state and in our support of the Federal Respect Act. Thank you all. Until next time, be safe.